Hey, it's Ryan Crotin here with ArmCare.com. Again, I'm back in TopVelocity with Brent Porciao and his crew, and it's been awesome. We just had a great lunch. We actually had this roast beef po' boy, and it could have put me to sleep, but I'm so excited to be out here and keep talking to everybody. The one thing that we left off at is the analytics part of the ArmCare.com platform. We went live earlier on Instagram, and now I'm going to talk a little bit about the scoring system that we have for the throwing arm. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the arm score. And the arm score is a relative number. It's actually a percentage of all the strength of the arm relative to our body weight. So our measure is that your arm needs to be 70% of your body weight in pounds of force. Okay, that's really important. And we use it as a raw score at 70. So you're going to see in this particular image, this athlete's got a lot of a blue around the dial. The arm score is good, it's over 70, but we want to keep pushing that strength value. That's so important. And I'm going to tell you why it's important, especially for health. I know we talked about on the Instagram Live how important innings pitched are and staying out there and accumulating games and experience to get greater opportunity in baseball. But this is how it works. Athletes' bodies change across their development. So I'm showing you, there's three particular images of baseball pitchers there. And in high school, the pitcher is generally a little smaller, and so what happens is the athlete's in a low mass, okay, and a low force condition. That means they're not throwing as hard because they're smaller. There's not a lot of momentum with their body weight, and they just lack a little bit of strength. But what happens as they progress, I'm going to just shoot the arrow over, is that the athlete starts gaining size. Okay, strength and conditioning is essential, I think, for baseball. I think that's been pretty much ruled out, that you need strength, you need to be powerful, and everybody needs a certain combination. But what can happen with the high school players throughout college, they might gain 10 to 15 pounds, okay? Now, what happens is the force and the mass are going up, and then they get signed, and then they come to a major league team. And this can happen also in high school. And generally from the time from high school to professional baseball, these guys are gaining about 22 pounds of body weight, okay? You pick up a 20-pound dumbbell or mass, that's a lot of weight to gain, okay? And it's moving fast. So what happens is now the athlete's in this high mass, high force environment, they're throwing faster. That is a critical piece. Now the issue is, you may be advancing your athlete's lean mass or body mass much faster than their arm strength. That's why we have this dynamometer. That's why we look at force testing using this, so that you can stay in check with your mass gains as an athlete and also your arm strength gains. Again, if your arm score starts to change, it starts to go down. You know, your body mass is increasing in a lot of size while your arm strength isn't catching up. So we need to keep pushing total arm strength relative to body weight to keep athletes healthy. So that's important. You know, coaches have been asking, like, how do we do this? And I'm just gonna flash a screen that's over top in the big screen here. We're gonna be looking at the dashboard. So when athletes are using our product, you can have as many as you want, and it comes to a nice little dashboard that you can keep control of what's going on with your athletes. You can look at leaderboards. You can look at athletes that don't have great arm readiness or fatigue, or they're relatively weak or have poor subjective scores. For some facilities that have a big group of athletes, they may have to have athletes type in how their arm feels at a 10, and basically, you know, their wellness data, soreness, those kinds of things are important to make decisions on what to do with our athletes. And the nice thing about the dashboard is it's not time consuming. This was developed by myself and the rest of the people in the company, but what I experience in professional baseball is there's a big time sink from looking at a ton of data, especially if you have 150 pitchers and you add position players to the mix, their arms matter. You got 300 plus players that you need to execute a decision in training. That is essential. We need to be fast. So what we do is we identify the players that are at most at risk early, and it's got a color-coded method to be able to determine which athletes in a watch category. You know, we got to be conservative. We got to start to change the programming to improve them back to a normal analytics, and then you go into a warning, which tells you, you know, I got to make an adjustment here. You might have to take away a start. You might have to take away a bullpen because their strength is plummeting. Okay, and I'm going to get into that in a little bit. Or a medical. You may have athletes that have severe strength loss, okay, where somebody needs to evaluate them. They could be masking pain. And I'm gonna go through those designations. But the cool thing is, you're a coach, you have it on the app, they test, you can scroll through and find your pitchers that at least on the high intensity throwing days, they might have hard pull downs, they might be having a velocity enhancement day, they might be on the mound. You can identify them and say, hey, I gotta do X, Y, and Z to be able to manipulate a change in their program, keep them healthy, give them the optimal amount of loading and not push them to the brink of fatigue, because we know that's a problem. So I'm gonna go flick through some of the images of the app. So the first thing that we look for after the arm score is actually looking at arm strength. And when you talk about arm strength, we're talking about internal rotation. We have to see the strength that's used in acceleration. We then have to look at external rotation. Those are the muscles primarily that are going to decelerate the arm after the ball's released. We have to look at scaption. So that's the strength that we need to raise our arm and hold it in position to get an optimal release point to make it repeatable. We don't want to have an effective command. And I know we talked a little bit on the Instagram Live, but we talked about pitch efficiency, and that's lowering the amount of pitches per inning, and that has to happen through a consistent release point. So we need that scaption strength, and then we have grip. And when we talked about this with our skeleton here, we're talking about the UCL. It's going over this area from your bump, okay, the inside bump to your forearm, small piece. Inside you'll feel a little divot. You roll your thumb down this bumpy part. You might feel a little tender. That's where your UCL region is. And we need our grip strength to be pitch grip. We need to be strong there to prevent injury. Now the next metric is really important in terms of the training. We need to understand what's the relative combination of training that's front to back of the shoulder. If you got really heavy back of the shoulder strength, external rotation, your decelerators are stronger than your accelerators, well, that can produce an injury risk. And what we have at the top level is a 1.05. So that means if our deceleration muscles are 5% stronger, okay, than our accelerators, all right, we need to start shifting programming to balance it out 1-to-1. Now on the flip side, you're gonna see a lot of younger athletes that have really strong acceleration muscles, are internal rotators. That's bringing the hand to either the midline or forward, towards the floor. So those muscles can be incredibly strong relative to our decel muscles, which are on the back. Now in that particular instant, we want to have the decelerators, our external rotators, to have at least 85% of the strength of the internal rotators. So if you're noticing with your athletes that they're at 0.7 or 0.8 and they're not at that 0.85, well, you need to improve the strength at the back of the shoulder. That's really, really important. And what you're going to find too, when you do long lever strength, you increase that, you're also going to increase external rotation strength. So it's good to make sure that you don't focus a lot on short lever strength, which I mean with a bent elbow opposed to long lever, which is an extended arm. We need to do that. Okay, next in line, we got a scale to look at fatigue, okay? And the way we look at fatigue is that a higher number is better. So we're looking at the percentage of fresh strength. So our baseline measures in the week, which we have pre-bullpen or pre-high intensity throwing day for starters, 72 hours, each 72 hours for relievers, and then we do 1 day a week for position players that is not following a 24-hour period where an athlete did a heavy upper body lift, because if you tire out your upper body muscles, it's going to affect your readings. But we have a safety range of 10% fatigue. So that means that they have to retain 90% of their strength after throwing. That is critical, okay? There are times, especially in the off season, you might want to have a more fatiguing protocol, but you need to have built-in rest days. We're not saying that if the athlete has fatigue, you got to take things away. You just have to be pretty well educated as far as making the rest days fall in line. For example, you may have your Fridays as one of your most intense throwing days. It's a good idea to have 72 hours apart between your bullpens. You have it on Tuesday, you have it on Friday, you get 72 hours in between. Your Friday bullpen day can be a lot higher demand because you can give the athlete recovery on Saturday and Sunday. So seeing the fatigue levels dip below 90 is not a bad plan at times, okay? So that's important. We want to see usually no more than 10% in games. That's important too, because that's going to tell us, hey, how fatigued is the athlete, okay? So the next thing that we got to look at is what we call the strength velocity ratio. This puts people at an even scale relative to their velocity capability, and that's pounds, okay, per mile per hour, all right? Pounds per miles per hour. That's called the strength velocity ratio. And we want to see that level to be 1.6. So case in point, if an athlete has a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, we want to get them in an absolute sense. We want them total arm strength to be 160 pounds. We need to keep pushing that because, you know, if we jack up max strength for the throwing arm, it's also going to increase the relative strength to body weight, which, remember, the arm score is 70. We want to get above 70. So it's an important metric. I know a lot of coaches are really using this and dialing in to also examine the fatigue properties of their athletes and when to pivot if they're using weighted ball training. So, for example, if you have a guy in a weighted ball program and you're doing heavy running guns and you got a day that's coming up and you see, okay, well, this athlete is at a 1.0. That means that they have way higher velocity than they do pounds of force of the throwing arm. You're noticing that that change has happened. That's when you need to make a pivot. You need to decide right then and there, hey, we're going to scale back. We need to bump up strength in this period of time while the velocity is high, because if not, it should make intuitive sense. You're going to be throwing harder with a weaker arm. You know, that to me is pretty cut and dry. We don't want to have athletes expand velocity and not have a strong arm, and especially the science says within an athlete, an increase of 1 mile per hour is equivalent to 1 Newton meter, which is how we measure torque on the elbow for the inner elbow, what it needs to protect itself. So we need to have the strength. We need to ensure that ratio is high. Okay, the last thing that we got to look at is the recovery, all right, out of this measure. So we're looking at fresh test to fresh test. We have to compare when the athlete's at their baseline as best as possible throughout the training week and competitive week to be able to see, is the athlete losing strength at a watch category, a warning category, or medical. A watch category means that that muscle is under 5 pounds of its previous baseline average, okay? So that means there is some weakness there, and we need to make a determination how we're going to influence training. I'm going to go to the board and show you that in a minute. And then the next thing that we have to be able to determine, is it a warning? Okay, a warning is going to have a magenta color around the strength measure, okay? And that warning is going to tell us we have to make a decision on competition. That means a muscle group has lost 8 pounds of force. And the way we derive this is our experience in professional baseball and looking at something called a Z-score. So basically, the distance of the scores from a mean and a player, but we're giving it a raw number that really associated to those Z-scores. So a Z-score of 2 would have been about 8 pounds. But now you get to 12 pounds, okay? And it's not unusual to see this at times in the year, but that's when athletes, you got to start thinking they should probably be evaluated. That's a big time strength loss. They definitely probably have central nervous system fatigue. Okay, they don't know that it's going on. Their arm might not feel the burning sensation like lactic acid. It is internal, it is neural. So we have to look at that. Athletes that might have TOS, if we have low blood supply to our throwing arm, that means there could be something going on there, okay? There could be masking something, so you want to have that communication, and that keeps us in a good place. So from here, I'm going to talk about how do you take this data and make training decisions. Now, our app spits out how to approach these analytics and perform the training. And if you take the Certified ArmCare Specialist course, we go through, if you want to create your own programs, your own individualized training programs based on the data, we go through it inside and out. It's a 6.5-hour course. It took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to get it to a level where you get a high amount of education, and I believe it's a competitive advantage. Obviously, if your best pitchers are on the field more than someone else's, you got a better chance of winning. That's the whole way I think about it. I know we talk about velocity, we talk about command, we talk about health in our company, but for you as coaches and players, we want you to win, we want you to earn scholarships, we want you to be signed, we want you to win championships. That's huge. So let's go to the board. All right, so now you know all the metrics. I went through all the metrics, but what we have to determine in our training is if the athlete's fatigued or if they have inhibited recovery or they're weak. So I have the acronym F, IR, and W, okay? F being fatigue, okay? IR means inhibited recovery, and then the W is weak. The analytics have to tell you this so that you don't overtrain the athlete or undertrain the athlete. So for example, when we look at fatigue, as I mentioned, we're looking at the post-test. How fatigued is this arm after heavy throwing loads? And then the way we match that up is we look at what is the percent fresh strength. So we get an actual number there. Remember what I said is that we want to have at 90%. That's telling us that things are going well. 90%. We want 90% of our fresh strength. Okay, now again, what I said in the off season, if you're gonna scale it up a little bit, they're gonna lose more strength, so they might be at 88% or 80%. They gotta have a couple days to recover. You can't keep pushing that throwing arm. If you've killed it one day, it's gotta recover, okay? Now the next thing is looking, do they have inhibited recovery? That's where we look at our recovery analytics. We're looking at that average of fresh to the new set of fresh measures. And like what I said, we're looking at 5, 8, and 12. Those numbers. So did the athlete lose 5 pounds of strength, 8 pounds of strength, or 12? All right, so now we know if they have an inhibited recovery, all right? Now, here's the key. If they're within range, okay, so they're 90% or above, we know they're not really fatigued. The arm's in a good place. You know, that's pretty standard fatigue level for games, especially for starters. And we look at the inhibited recovery, we look at that recovery score, and we're noticing, hey, none of the colors show up, so we know their recovery is doing well. They're doing the right things, the strength's bouncing back. But then we get to the W. Are they weak? And that's the first score we look at. Strength matters most. I mentioned that because they're all based on strength. But now we look at relative strength, and like what I had, it's percent body weight, okay? And remember our arm score again, we're looking for a score of 70. But when we break that down, all right, even if they have a score of 70, we have to see which muscles are weak. The accelerator muscles, we want to see 20% of body weight strength for the force you can put into internal rotation or acceleration. We want 20% going back, okay? When we raise our arm into our test, scaption strength, we want that at 15%. And when we pinch, when we look at the muscles that overlie the UCL or the ulnar collateral ligament, which gets reconstructed in Tommy John, we want that muscle to be at 15%. So when you add them up, that comes to 70. That's at a basic level, okay? It doesn't matter if you're 10 or you're 40 in the pro baseball, but we want to make sure that we keep boosting that strength relative to body weight. So here's the issue. Okay, here I'm coming close to the closing of this particular segment. What happens often in baseball is that you're going to take an athlete when you test them and they show weakness, okay? So their relative strength is down, their percent body weight strength is down, it's below 70 or it may be 70 and you're able to find out what muscles. And what happens is we confuse this with not looking at fatigue, and we start to take this athlete and we're intensifying the training, which is from fatigue, and we're pushing that athlete into even more fatigue when the athlete needs recovery and we need to scale back. We need to regress the demand. That is a big issue, and this is why I think 100% of our injuries really are caused by coaching errors, for the simple fact is that, hey, they got a lot of throwing workload that's happening. We can calculate that. We can capture it with different tools that measure external workload. But when it comes to training, we have not, until now, had a process to determine the difference between a fatigued arm, one that doesn't bounce back, or a weak arm. You know, consequently, if the athlete's not fatigued and the athlete has no inhibited recovery, and you're looking at their relative strength, you're finding muscles that are, less than 20% or 15% for some of those tests, and overall might be below 70, we need to intensify the training. We need more of this. They're weak. We have to increase the training demand. And that, to me, is really important in understanding this continuum to keep athletes healthy and to individualize your training based on the player and not have them fit into a whiteboard program that has everybody doing the same thing, because that's not going to keep them at an optimal state and that's not going to keep them healthy. Thanks for listening.